Street protests against police brutality in Egypt. Deja vu for a country that's gone through revolution and counter-revolution. The president promises action against police abuse, but is that enough? How much of a threat is rising popular anger to the regime? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. Once again, Egyptian police are in the spotlight as people take to the streets saying enough is enough. In a series of incidents, police officers appear to have used bully tactics or even violence, not just against political opponents, but also against civil society activists, journalists and ordinary citizens. Well, President Abdel Fettah el-Sisi suggests new legislation could make police officers more accountable. Doctors and medical staff have been staging a sit-in. They're incensed by the detention of two of their colleagues last week by police who reportedly also suffered assault. The demonstration at the October the 6th hospital in Cairo was held in silence to highlight a government ban on public protests. But how will this new momentum of protests play out in a very changed Egypt? Well, since Sisi was elected in 2014, human rights groups have recorded widespread abuses. Human Rights Watch says tens of thousands have been imprisoned without a fair trial. Hundreds of people have been detained secretly and many have died in custody. The economy is faltering, according to reports. A lack of foreign investment and lower foreign currency earnings have prolonged a slowdown. Unemployment remains high. And because the government banned the Muslim Brotherhood, there remains no real opposition to the regime right now. Let's bring in our guest to the show now. Joining me here in the studio is Khalil Al-Anani, Associate Professor at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. In London, Wafik Moustafa, Founder and Chairman of the British Arab Network. And in Berlin, Ahmed Badawi, Senior Researcher in the Department of Political Science at the Free University of Berlin. Welcome to you all. If I could start here in the studio with Khalil. In just the last few days, Khalil, we've seen protests by members of the public, by professional syndicates. Is the public losing patience?
I think so. I think given the fact that the repression that is taking place in Egypt over the last few weeks and months, there's a sense of resentment and anger among people. People lost faith that this regime can give them sense of dignity or sense of security, I would say. That's why many of Egyptians, they're losing patience with this regime, and that's why they came to the streets over the last few days.
Okay. Wafik, do you agree with that? How alarming are the protests we've seen?
It's very alarming and very worrying because the police has been out of control for several years now. There's no check on police. The police is killing people, as killing this young taxi driver in downtown Cairo, a policeman shooting him in the head 3 times. And it happened all the time. It is a consistent theme of police brutality. And the public is just had enough from this police state, and I think it's extremely dangerous. Nobody feels safe in Egypt if he's going to be shot. The Italian young man was found mutilated, tortured, and dead a couple of weeks ago. I think it's something going drastically wrong in Egypt.
Something seems to be going wrong in the opinion of those coming out on the streets. You mentioned there, Mr. Wafik, the demonstrations on Thursday that happened in Darb al-Ahmar region after a policeman allegedly shot dead a taxi driver. But there have been other incidents, haven't there? On Tuesday, we had lawyers beginning a sit-in in a court in Gharbiya province over another alleged police assault on a lawyer there. And then, of course, Saturday, we got the doctors doing their silent stand in silent protest against another alleged police abuse of 2 doctors in an emergency room. I guess my question, Ahmed Badawi, the common theme here seems to be allegations of police abuse. What's happened to the human rights situation in Egypt in the last year?
I think we're seeing continuous deterioration of the human rights situation, but I think what's even more worrying and perhaps even more damaging to the state is a deterioration not just in basic political rights, but also in social and economic rights. You've mentioned in your introduction the problem with the deterioration of the economic situation. Cost of living is going up all the time. Egyptians are finding it very difficult to make ends meet. And I'm not only talking about the poor, even those who are considered to be part of the core of the middle class are finding it very difficult to meet their daily needs. So I think the deterioration of rights in general, political rights, but also social and economic rights, is emphasizing the incapacity of the state to provide not just security and respect for human rights, but also to provide general welfare for the population. And that is very worrying indeed.
We'll talk more on that point. It's an excellent point. We'll talk more about it in a minute, Ahmed. But it's interesting, the point which Ahmed made there and the point that we've been talking about so far in the show, aren't those 2 points, social justice, abuse by security services, aren't they the exact 2 points that led to the revolution against the Mubarak regime?
Absolutely. I would say it's the same circumstances, even if it's not worse than it used to be before 2011. Now we are witnessing a systematic violations of human rights in Egypt, a systematic use of force, even excessive force, against civilian and unarmed protesters, as it happened over the last few
So could we
months.
be heading back to another revolution, or
Well,
is that exaggerated?
No, it's not exaggerated, but it might take some time. We are talking about this kind of a growing resentment among people. The wall of fear is dismantling, step by step. I think the regime is losing control over the country. The regime tried over the last couple of years to rebuild the fear wall, but it's collapsing now. Now there is growing resentment among people, among different segments of society. Look at the doctors, lawyers, even the ordinary public. So now people believe that this regime cannot provide the basic elements of life, like security.
But what about when the president says, look, we're changing laws? He says, problems do occur in every country. He said there are some bad police officers, but these are exceptions to the rule, and we're dealing with it.
I think the rule is the violations of human rights and the violation of the police. This is not an exception. And look, President Sisi himself, he gave immunity to the police officers. And when he spoke a couple of years ago in a leaked talk, and we said that any officer that would commit any crime would not be held accountable.
But he said publicly that there will be accountability, hasn't he?
Well, he has to say that because he's seeing a lot of anger is coming to the streets, a lot of despair and a lot of resentment. So he has to come out and to speak to the people, to calm them down. But there is a big gap between what he says and what's happening on the ground.
Ahmed, doctors are talking about, for example, just to give one example, about escalating their protests. If their demands are not met, they're going to have another meeting in March, they say. Do you think this could turn into the sort of crippling strikes by key sectors of workers and in the economy that we saw a la 2011, shall we say?
I think we're heading in this direction. But let me respond to your question whether this is the beginning of another revolution. I hope so, but I'm afraid that it is not. You need an organized revolutionary agency to carry out a revolution. That organized revolutionary agency doesn't exist at the moment. So what I'm worried about, in 2011, there were at least a way to channel all this anger, all these grievances into a form of organized, non-violent protest. What I'm worried about now is that these uprisings in neighborhoods, in factories, in professional syndicates, that they will go out of control, and as you rightly said, they might lead to a crippling of the capacity of the state to do anything. And the outcome, if it is not going to be real radical reform, whether through a revolution or through the regime somehow wakes up and realizes that things cannot continue the way they are, I think the outcome might be total chaos in society. And we're beginning to see some indications of that right now.
Okay, I could see Wafik shaking his head in disagreement. Go ahead, Wafik.
Well, of course, Egypt has got a lot of people and elite who can lead a change in Egypt. The big problem now that you have got about 60,000 people in prisons. We've got thousands of people disappeared. And the big problem as well is the politicized judiciary. The judges are very politicized. They acquit policemen. There's no policeman being held in custody. The trials are kept secret. We don't know what's going on. I think Sisi is giving the security forces, the police or the army, a green light to be brutal.
How do you respond, Wafik, to
this is
his,
not going to be taken.
He would say he has nothing to do. In fact, he's on the record as saying he doesn't influence the judiciary. The judiciary is independent in Egypt. They make their own decisions.
Well, if the judiciary are not independent, Sisi have closed down NGOs, closed down human rights organizations, international human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch are not allowed to operate in Egypt. He is blocking every avenue. He is blocking people from demonstrating, from meeting, for expressing their views. As you could see, even the Egyptian doctors in about 10 or more than 10,000 people were standing in the streets against the regime. There's a lot of other people, engineers and other elites and other people from professions like lawyers who are supporting the doctors. So it is a widespread discontent with the regime. I am afraid it's going to lead to civil disobedience and may lead to failed state at the end.
On the point which Ahmed mentioned there ago, Khalil, about how he's worried of chaos, that this won't be channeled and led into any sort of organised revolution. Where is civil society then? Egypt has a history of civil society. Where are the opposition groups? We know the Muslim Brotherhood, you know, they've been, a lot of them put in jail or killed. But what about all the other opposition groups? Where are the Badawi of Egypt?
Well, unfortunately, since Sisi came to power, he tried to silence everybody. Now you cannot find an organization that can speak out and can criticize Sisi. Now you have a propaganda that trying to improve the image of the regime at the expense of the people. So now,
but some people are finding it possible to come out and demonstrate in the streets, aren't they?
That's
people
right.
Are upset about taxi drivers and lawyers and doctors. Where are the political opposition?
Sami, there are 2 points here. The first point is that we are talking about non-organized people. I mean, talking about the public who come to the streets because they are fed up with the police brutality. But at the same time, most of the political opposition, either in a prison, either outside the country, or some of them even have been co-opted by the regime. Look at, for instance, some of the leftist people that used to be against Mubarak. Some of the Kifaya movement figures. Now some of them, they are, because they are anti-brotherhood and they hate the brotherhood, they think that they can support a military regime, which it turned out to be that this regime is even against them and not with them. So now the regime is trying to make a fragmentation to the opposition, trying to silence anyone who will speak out and criticize the regime. Now everybody in Egypt either is trying to move away from politics or trying to go to the streets by violent ways. And I understand what Ahmed is talking about. Ahmed is worrying from with the closing the public sphere, was not giving people some space to breathe, people can turn violent. And when you shut down politics, definitely would find violence on the other hand.
All right, I'm going to continue to try and play devil's advocate here. Let me take it back to Wafik, though. Are we discounting the possibility of the regime reforming and with time improving the situation when we draw these sorts of negative scenarios going forward for the country? Those who support the regime would say, you know, they are working on it. They've launched mega projects which will, with time, pick up income and improve the lot of Egyptians. And they're working on new laws, apparently, to hold police accountable for any abuses. And it's just a matter of time. Things will improve. But it's a huge country. You can't fix all the problems in a couple of years. Well,
he has got a dummy parliament, which he did not say anything, did not support the public. He trying to do some whitewash because obviously he is worried because the public have risen against him. He's quite isolated inside the country and indeed abroad. And I think the military itself, the military establishment which control him at the end of the day, is divided. And I think Egypt is going into a very, very difficult, critical period, and things need to be corrected very quickly. And judiciary got to act independently from the state. Judiciary should not act as an instrument to protect the police from being put in prison and being charged, because so far the police who killed Shaimal Sabah have been released and in a process of retrial, and this is going on. There's no policeman have been arrested, have been imprisoned. They should be tried in public court like anybody else. Policeman or army or security service should not be above the law. Well, that's what happened in Egypt. This consistent theme of brutality cannot be accepted and not going to be accepted.
Ahmed, you touched on the point of economics. Lately, we've had reports of shortages of basic food items in some of the state-run or state-subsidized supermarkets, which are very important for the lower-income earners in that country. Are these perhaps some of the reasons in the background that are pushing public frustration out onto the streets?
I definitely think so. I mean, police brutality and the way the government handles its relationship with the people is definitely a major source of grievance. But in the background, as you rightly say, there are all these economic related grievances. Egyptian society is no longer a productive society. We import almost everything we need to feed ourselves from abroad. The agricultural sector has almost collapsed. The little bit of industry that we had, for example, in the Delta, in all these cotton factories, they're almost collapsed. The economy is no longer a matter of inputs and outputs. The economy is a good educational system, a good health system, a sense of legitimacy, a low level of enforcement costs, which only comes when the regime is seen as legitimate. None of these factors exist in Egypt now, let alone the fear of foreign investors to come and invest in Egypt because of everything they hear on the news, the lack of stability, the fluctuation in the exchange rate. All these are factors that are pushing away potential investors.
But hang on, Ahmed, what about what the regime supporters say, that there is interest from foreign investors when it comes to the petrochemical field? There is work being done on mega economic projects like the second Suez Canal, and these things will come to fruition. What do you make of that argument?
We've seen this kind of developmental model in the 1960s that is based on mega engineering projects, and experience tells us that these projects have a very long return, very long-term return on investments, and they're definitely not the kind of priority projects that are needed now in order to have a significant improvement in the quality of the life of the people. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, of course, investors are interested in the petrochemical industry because they're so far away from the country. They are offshore, they are in the desert, they can be easily secured, and there is a huge potential for corruption in these projects. Of course,
so when that trickle down, even if they're not in the
interest.
heart of Egypt, even if they're offshore, who's to say? Maybe I'll take that point to Wafik, because I could see you shaking your head a moment ago. The supporters of the regime would say, those benefits will come to the people, even if they're offshore or in the middle of the desert rather than in the heart of Cairo or Alexandria. Are they wrong?
Well, yes. It's all our phantom projects, like say he's going to have 1 million acres of new agriculture cultivated land. He's going to have 1 million dwellings and flats. He's going to have 1 million here and there without really showing where the money comes from and when it will be implemented. I think it's all phantom project. If you look at the dam in Ethiopia going to dry the water table in Egypt, so the land going to shrink. So he's really I may use the word living in sort of Photoshop type of propaganda, like having the bullet train in Egypt, which is go like 200 miles per hour, all this sort of things comes in the media for propaganda, which you have no foundation at all of reality. In Egypt, the streets are dirty, the infrastructure is crumbling, the Egyptian pound is coming down, is almost past the $9. Bearing in mind the Egyptian pound in 6 years ago was equivalent to $3. Now, a dollar equivalent to 9 Egyptian pounds. So a huge devaluation of the currency. So I think the country needs knees financially and economically.
Of course, dollar shortages are one of the reasons given for why state companies having difficulty importing quantities of basic foodstuffs. Now, Khalil, there is a lot of propaganda on all sides, as you would expect in any political dispute, claim and counterclaim. But when the situation comes to a point where the state had to withdraw 3 tenders within 3 months for basic foodstuffs like cooking oil because there simply weren't enough bidders, or the prices were too high. When it's at that stage where people don't trust you anymore, that they don't even want to bid for your contracts, that is worrying, isn't it? Is the government or the state losing credibility in economic circles?
Oh yeah, I think to a large extent. Let's remember, Sami, that Sisi came to power without any economic agenda, without any economic plan. Frankly, when he was asked what are you going to do with the unemployment, for instance, he said, I'll bring some vendor cars that people can, or youth can use them to just generate some income. But he doesn't have a real and realistic economic policy or a plan. The second thing is that if you look at there is an agreement with the World Bank to give Egypt, I think, $1 billion, and look at the conditions of this kind of agreement, it would absolutely come at the expense of the poor. So the poor will get poorer and the rich will get richer even. So the sense of injustice is growing right now in Egypt. Egypt has one of the high rates of unemployment in the region.
But isn't that supposed to be part of the reason why the president brought out this card system to help subsidize, help poorer people to buy food through subsidy through a card? Isn't he would say he's looking out for the poorer people.
Look, Sam, you're talking about 90 million people. So to what extent this kind of policy would feed these 90 million people? We're talking about, first of all, there is no any sense of transparency on how the money is spent in Egypt. Sisi, for instance, got about $47 billion from the Gulf, and no one knows where this money gone. So the sense of accountability, responsibility doesn't exist in this regime. So I don't count on his promises. What we have seen over the last couple of years is nothing but just talk and talk and talk.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the point of Gulf aid. That segues us nicely to a final point with Ahmed Badawi. Egypt is a strategically important country to the region, to world powers. Can it count on foreign help and foreign support as it was able to in 2013, for example?
I think it can count on that, but up to a point. Nobody has an interest in seeing a similar Syria or a scenario similar to what's happening in Syria. Nobody has an interest in seeing that in Egypt. But there is also a limit to what the world can do. There is a limit.
Have Gulf countries reached their limit? What do you think, Ahmed?
Well, maybe they haven't reached their limit yet, but I think they will reach it very soon. Egypt is a large country. It's like a black hole. You cannot keep subsidizing 90 million people from outside. The state, the regime, they have to get their act together.
Right.
They have to get the country being productive again. And they can only do that if they give people a sense of security and a sense of justice.
All right, we've got about 40 seconds left. I'm going to give it to Wafik because I could see he was shaking his head again. Go ahead, Wafik. In 40 seconds.
Well, it worries me. The Gulf money of tens of billions, it worries me because it's not been deposited in the Egyptian central bank. It's been deposited elsewhere, and a lot of money has been taken out of the country. There's a huge corruption, and Sisi is personally responsible about it. Egypt is in a great economic trouble as much as being run as a police state. This got to be changed.
All right. Well, I'm sure there's plenty more we could add on and comment and counter-comment on this one. But for now, we're out of time. So let's thank our guests here in the studio, Khalil Al-Anani, and joining us overseas in London, Wafik Moustafa, and from Berlin, Ahmed Badawi. And thank you for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, you can go over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter if you prefer. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and on behalf of the whole team here, for now, it's goodbye.